Okay, well, thank you, everyone. What I will be speaking about here is mostly about blockchain and about Serbia and that ecosystem, but my current thoughts are to act like you don't know much about blockchain already. So let me see like this, who heard about blockchain before this? That is really good. I like it. How many of you consider, blockchain to be equal to cryptocurrencies? Okay, this is also good. How many of you heard about anything else other than Bitcoin and Ethereum? Okay, a bit less, but still quite a lot. So this is, I think, one of the reasons I really think that Serbia is a pretty good country to, create blockchain projects, and I will be talking about that a bit. But let's start with blockchain in general a bit. Can I get the next slide, please? Okay, well, about me, it will be a really short introduction. I've been in tech for 17 years now. I've been involved with several startup companies. I had a chance to launch different web-based products from 2008 going forward. I have a bit of experience with selling some of these products and companies later to bigger companies. The latest acquisition was a company I was a CEO in called Managed WP, which was acquired by GoDaddy 2 years ago for about $20 million. I stayed as part of GoDaddy's senior leadership actually team for a bit less than 2 years before moving forward and starting a company called MVP Workshop, which does blockchain projects right now. The main reason I think I left GoDaddy as a Fortune 500 company to pursue a blockchain-related career was because I had a chance to have a couple of years of experience with blockchain before that from Devana, from the previous company we founded. And the second reason was that I personally consider that web itself is pretty much not growing. What I can say from a position of from a leadership position in a Fortune 500 company, which I held for 2 years, is that web companies in general now grow through mergers and acquisitions. Blockchain is an interesting opportunity for Serbia, the region, and everywhere else, I think, because it's actually one of the emerging markets like IoT, like VR, like machine learning, where we can actually enter with a relatively low price. And actually, I would say we are pretty much favored by the way blockchain projects are currently mostly being financed, which are ICOs. How many of you heard about ICOs? Some of you might have known then around 20% of all ICOs currently happened from Eastern Europe, which is a good and a bad sign, but I'll discuss that for a short while. Currently, we had more than 500 ICOs actually happen successfully, and they raised from April last year over $9 billion, which is an emerging market, a really strong market in terms of fundraising. But it's not really the best market ever to be in terms of success of the companies. Out of these 500 companies which raised $9 billion in the last year, around 60% of companies already failed for multiple reasons. So we are in a bubble in a way, but it is showing that we have a really interesting technology coming up. Next slide, please. So, yeah, we can go to the next one, because this is what we want to discuss, basically blockchain projects and products that actually work. Okay, next one. Well, sorry about that. We can move one more, because I want to see the next picture. So what is blockchain? I thought I would be doing it myself, so this would have been really very short. But blockchain in reality is a technological solution that helps us solve one important problem on the internet, and that is basically the double spend problem. What blockchain said was, we can decide if something happened without actually having a third party confirm it. And we can do it by having actually multiple validators tell us about the same truth. So in general, blockchain is something we had before, which is a distributed database or a distributed ledger of many transactions, which is not a new thing. What blockchain brought was a way to reach consensus over the internet, which is an unstable network where you don't really have the ability to trust anyone. Next slide, please. In 1973, internet solved this with TCP/IP protocol by solving something which is in mathematics called the two generals problem. Basically, it means that if we have an insecure connection, or if we have two generals which need to communicate over an unsafe territory by sending out emissaries, the best way to solve this issue actually is to send out a lot of emissaries, so that you statistically believe that the other side reached, received your message. So internet basically with TCP/IP protocol created a way for you to communicate in a server-side and client-side environment where you were pretty much sure that the other side is probably going to receive the message, even if we can consider the connection unstable and unsafe, which early internet connections really were. What blockchain tried to solve was what happens if one of these two sides is not just unsure if the other side received the message, but what is happening if the other side is actually also lying. Next slide, please. So this is a bit more complex, but not too complex in general. It's called the Byzantine generals problem, which is pretty much similar. And blockchain tried to solve it, but by saying we can know if one of the generals or more, or even more of these generals are lying, if we take into account that every member of the group should have all the information about what the other generals also decided to do. So this led to this distributed ledger. Why did this happen in 2008 and not before? Well, the main reason is that blockchain introduced something called proof of work, which basically said you are going to have to spend money to achieve this consensus, and we are going to say that if most of the network agrees about something being truth, then we'll consider it an absolute truth, and we will be able to how would they put it? We will be able to confirm this without having any third party actually in charge of the truth behind the information which is being distributed. Next slide, please. So, what is it that we are getting with the blockchain? Well, in 2008, the theorem about the Byzantine generals happened, and we got from that Bitcoin. Basically, Bitcoin just said that, how are we going to solve the Byzantine generals problem over the internet? That was the main thing. Many people say, well, blockchain has been around for 10 years now. Do we really have valid applications of it? Well, it took internet about 22 years to get us to the web era. The first, in 1973, when we had the TCP/IP protocol happen, we basically said, okay, we are going to now have email, and then we had the World Wide Web. But it took 20 years for us to actually use it for anything other than messaging. Right now, blockchain is in a similar situation. Basically, we are using it for financial transactions in some way. It has certain incentives for people not to lie. It has some underlying currencies when it comes to public blockchains. But basically, we are probably in the 80 years of internet. We are in the 80s. So we are thinking about things that might be done with blockchain, but it will probably take a couple of years for us to actually start using it on a larger scale. So what is blockchain really solving? Basically, it is solving the decentralized trust issue. You know, it lets you have a trustless system where people can collaborate without having a third-party centralized authority say, is this what they're doing good or not? Next slide. So how does this work? You know, it basically lets you have three things. One thing is transparency. In order for a blockchain to work, all the players in the system have to have all the information. Sometimes you don't really have to reveal all the information by using something called zero knowledge proofs. We can discuss that in another topic. But in general, all of the players have to have transparency about what is happening with the system. The next thing is that it's immutable. That means you can change the state of something in a blockchain, but if you change it, everyone will know that it was changed. You cannot go back into the database 2 years ago and say, well, we'll make it like it happened in a different way, or the entire project does not work. And the third thing is decentralization. It basically lets you remove expensive third-party validators from the system and lets the player in the network be the validator himself. Next slide. So basically, in 2008, we started having Bitcoin as the first, cryptocurrency. It led to what we have today, you know, mostly about currencies being ran on blockchain and promising different things. Some of them, like Bitcoin, are there just for financial purposes. Some of them, like Ethereum, are trying to solve a much bigger problem. And what we might have in the future, and what is the idea with projects like Ethereum and similar, is to have everything run on decentralized, smart contract-based solutions, you know, where we can basically have entire economies and entire ways of running companies and things on the blockchain itself, which should be transparent, immutable, and decentralized. Next slide. So what does this mean? You know, basically, when you go to the bank, you have your money in the bank. You know what your account data is, but you trust the bank in order to know about what is going on with your money and what is going on with other people's money. If you decide to pay your money to another account, which might be in another bank, you are trusting your bank, you are trusting the central bank, and then the other person's bank that he will actually get the money. In blockchain, you can remove the central bank and you can remove the banks and do it yourself, like in cash, between unlimited number of individuals for unlimited amount of money as long as you actually have this. What does this mean? Does this mean that this is only for currencies or only something we should associate with money? Well, actually it doesn't. You know, we can associate it with any transaction done by any party where we need to have a decentralized way to prove that the entire system is telling the actual truth, you know, and that no one is lying to each other about how much money does he have or how many products does he have or whatever. And we can do it without expensive intermediaries such as banks or other regulating parties and still get the same result. So this is what makes blockchain really powerful. You know, when you have a system where you have an intermediary which takes 5, 10, 20% out of something, you can simply remove them and basically the blockchain is going to do it for you. You just have to pay the validators in the system itself, which in some cases is also expensive, but right now for high value assets, it's not. And what blockchain is basically promising to do in the next years is to solve the technical issues which would let it, you know, be cheaper for smaller level transactions too. Next slide. So right now we have 3 types of blockchains. We have public ones like Bitcoin. That means that your blockchain is something which is transparent to the entire world, and it's also permissionless, which means that anyone can enter this world. You know, you can buy a machine and start mining, validating these transactions, and you become the part of the system. So basically, Bitcoin and Ethereum are both permissionless and public. We have some that are public and transparent to everyone, like Ripple, which are also permissioned, which means that an authority needs to let you enter the system. And you also have projects which are permissioned and private, which means that not everyone can enter the system, and only that the companies or individuals that are already part of the system, who has been authorized, can view the data. So basically it means that it is transparent for the people who are in the system, but not for the larger public. Permissionless and private blockchains obviously do not exist because it would make no sense. So next slide, please. So what are the new opportunities here? The main new opportunity is in removing expensive intermediaries, and also proving in cases when we have really high value asset classes, such as money or silver or gold or real estate. We can make these transactions right now without having a central registry. There is obviously a problem with that because I mentioned high value transactions. What does this mean? When you have an ability to send out some money to someone, usually the money you are sending out is going to be more important than the cost of using the blockchain. But blockchain right now is not very good for high volume of low level transactions. Next slide, please. So this is something I just mentioned in Ethereum. This is what Ethereum is trying to solve. They are basically saying, we had Bitcoin. So the idea with Bitcoin was, I'm just going to be able to send some money to Ben. And basically Bitcoin was just that. It was a simple calculator that let you send out money to different people. And everyone would know that you actually sent that money and that they received it. And now they have the money and you don't. Then people started building blockchains for other products. So they basically said, okay, this is how this is going to work. We need another blockchain which can deal with something else other than money. And then we had stuff like Ethereum, which said, basically, why do we need to create a different blockchain for every different project? We can basically create something like an Android operating system or a Windows operating system and let other people build their projects as just as software on top of that. So they aimed to build something like a world computer. Next slide. So this is basically what it happens. Ethereum being Turing complete means you can program any type of software on it. You don't have to just limit yourself to financial transactions or just to supply chains or just to something else. Next slide, please. Okay, so what are the industries that are going to be disrupted by this? Obviously, the first that comes to mind is financial industry, because this is why we mentioned cryptocurrencies. Next slide, please. But it's not just that. Most of the stuff is happening currently in the financial industry. Currently, it's about payments and it's about exchanges. Right now, we have around 80 stock market exchanges in the world and almost 200 blockchain or let's say cryptocurrency exchanges in the world. The next thing you also see here in clearing and settlements is also a financial service. We can discuss, how they're going to be implemented, and they need to be tied usually to other technologies such as IoT or some other oracle of data which is coming from the outside world, but they are letting you do really interesting transactions on blockchain itself automatically, or they're also letting the system, the computer itself, your car, whatever, do these transactions itself, which is pretty much amazing. The next thing, because of transparency and immutability, is also documentation. And there are many blockchain cases dealing with actual digital identity. When I say digital identity, this means that theoretically what we have as an identity could be transferred immutably all around the world without any issues through a blockchain project. So having a blockchain-based password could actually work in every country in the world without any ability for them to be actually, falsely manufactured. You cannot have a false blockchain-based digital identity or password, because every country, or at least 1/3 of all countries in the world, would need to accept your wrong data in order for you to enter the system. And there are many things which are covered by these 5% in other. And one of the most important of them is usually in digital supply chains, which are strongly emerging in the blockchain regarded space. And we actually had a company from Serbia raised a really big investment through an ICO in that department. Next slide, please. So what are the drivers here? Well, the first one is transparency. It's not just about digital currencies. They're going to be regulated. They're definitely not going to be anonymous. But what we have here is mainly transparency and immutability. So the base driver of blockchain is actually trust. In many cases, we are able to do faster transactions. It's much faster to send a Bitcoin from Serbia to US than to do a wire transfer of money from Serbia to the US. And it's also still cheaper. But with the rise of prices in Bitcoin, Western Union right now is still cheaper, but wire is more expensive. So we'll see, how does that work? Is it going to be Bitcoin? Is it going to be something else? But in general, reaching a consensus over a worldwide network, in many cases, when you have multiple regulators, is still faster on the blockchain. What are the problems? Well, the first restraint we are having is uncertainty in regulation. When you don't have, right now, basically, if you are handling someone's data, you need to be able to give it to proper authorities. You need to tell people where it is being stored. What happens if you have a world computer? No one owns the data, Theoretically, you are still the one owning the data, but in reality, it's actually all the players in the network. How does that work? It's still uncertain from a regulatory standpoint. The other thing is lack of awareness about what blockchain actually can or cannot do. Many companies just want to now apply this blockchain thing to their business model, and it's not how it works. If you don't really have a business model which can be decentralized or should be decentralized and should have regulators removed from a third-party position, then it makes no sense. In some cases, you can do it from a technological standpoint, but it's not the right thing to do from a real-life standpoint. In some cases, you really want to have a regulator because it's not about the costs of verifying truth. It's also about making people have certain type of desired behavior. In some cases, you can solve this by smart contracts, but not in every case do you want to have a smart contract which is going to make a decision instead of a person. No one is really going to cover all the cases. What happens if we actually have a critical, legal lawsuit and we had an IoT, self-driving car, ran over someone? What if that car was also a part of a blockchain network which is incentivized by money, I don't know, to save his owner? How do you deal with that? It's a dangerous machine, So lack of certain regulations is a problem, and lack of awareness what can or cannot be done is also a problem, because many people just believe that this is a magical pill that now brings trust to the system. It's not. It's still about people. It's still about same laws of sociology. It's still about how we act in different situations, but it lets us do much more things on the technological part much faster right now, while preserving a certain dose of integrity that we need right now when we have problems with the internet in terms of net neutrality, when we had Cambridge Analytica, when we had all the things we had. So opportunities are mainly about disruption, these industries which are currently heavily incentivized by having centralized regulatory systems which can be removed. So in a way you can say it's about giving power to the people, but in some cases that is too big of a promise. The next opportunity is, that we actually have more and more money flowing into it. We have a high adoption of blockchain-related projects, mostly as proof of concepts for now. And we have more and more platforms which can be created even from a small country such as ours. And the constraints are here. Still, I mentioned a couple of times, blockchain is currently really good for high-value, low-volume transactions. Scalability is quite a problem. We still now with Bitcoin, we are now experiencing in some cases, the amount of time needed for money to actually exchange hands. In some cases even goes to about 1 hour. So in some cases, we still have issues with scalability. Since we don't really understand it, security, privacy, and control are going to be an issue. There are still things that we need to solve there on the technical side. And one of the biggest constraints is actually the number of engineers currently working on this. Last summer, it was expected that the world has around 6,000 blockchain-related programmers. This is an extremely low number. Back then, Serbia was still handling it pretty well. And out of 25,000 total programmers in Serbia, we had around 80 people dealing with blockchain, which 80 people to 6,000 people globally was quite a big number. Right now, Serbia grew to about 200 people, but the number of blockchain developers in the world is probably over 40,000 people within a year. So we are having more and more talent entering this market, and probably one of the most important things that actually need to happen for blockchain to really explode is for us to get more talented engineers, product managers, and other people, not just people doing mining or crypto investing. We need actual engineering power in this department. So right now we have, for every existing blockchain developer, we have 14.3 companies trying to actually hire one, which means that there are obviously no unemployed blockchain developers. So next slide, please. So if we look at some of the reports we were able to buy or get, from Gartner and Markets to Markets research, it basically says, right now we used to be here. This is the historical data, and by their, recommendations, they expect in these 5 years for blockchain market to simply explode. I would say that right now the biggest constraint for it actually going there is the lack of business knowledge and engineering power. And this is what needs to happen in the next 2 years if we are going to achieve this or even go beyond that. Next slide, please. So this is also a breakdown. I believe that these slides will be public later, or we will at least publish them on sbi.rs. But this is the table that covers the same thing, but related to the verticals that I mentioned before. Next slide, please. So what are these new business models? Next slide. So they're basically relying on 2 things. One thing is decentralization, which is something I already mentioned. So the idea behind decentralization in general is that you can remove the intermediaries. And you can also incentivize people to be intermediaries in the system. And this is where tokenization comes. All public blockchains have some sort of cryptocurrency related to them because they need an actual token, a coin, that incentivizes the people who are part of the system to validate transactions, not just for themselves, but for other people too. So there are 2 movements which are critical to blockchain. One is decentralization, and that covers all possible blockchains out there. The other is tokenization that covers all of the public blockchains and some of the private blockchains. Some people will say if there is no tokenization, it's not actually a blockchain, just a distributed ledger. I tend not to agree, but in general, this is what we are talking about. Blockchain, you can, for one thing, you can say this is a distributed database, but you can also say this is a distributed database that uses decentralization and tokenization to incentivize people to be honest as part of this system. Next slide, please. Okay, so what does that mean? We can have decentralized money. We can have decentralized internet and domains. We can have decentralized storage. We already have a version of Amazon S3, or basically also a Dropbox or whatever on a blockchain. It's called IPFS. It is a peer-to-peer system, which is covered by something called Filecoin. It raised a $250 million investment last year, and from a technological standpoint, it's still doing really well. We can have decentralized applications, and we can also have decentralized protocols. Next slide. The protocol part is really interesting here because it also lets you, say, we're not going to trust one central server to serve everyone. We're not going to all have a social network where we need to ping Facebook. If we could have a high volume of low-level transactions on blockchain, we could have a Facebook on blockchain. So basically, it says, we can build all sorts of these applications like we have on the internet itself, but we can use a completely new model of doing this. Next slide. So this is the main difference. The web is, has a really thin protocol layer. It means, TCP/IP as the protocol it runs on, but there are many applications. Here we have a really powerful protocol layer, which lets you then create easily applications on top of it, which is what Ethereum does. And next slide, please. So these are the current projects, divided in a couple of different ways. Right now, these are just some of the more successful ones out of the 500 projects that happened in the last year. Next slide, please. So what is, older, chicken or the egg? Basically, did blockchain create decentralization or tokenization, or did it, did they create blockchain? It's hard to say, Basically, blockchain was created by Bitcoin in order to decentralize money, and money is a token by itself. So I would say, that the idea behind decentralization and tokenization created blockchain as such, but right now we are seeing that there are many other industries and not just money we can actually decentralize and tokenize. So this is what right now is happening in the world, so we are going into a full cycle. Next slide, please. What about blockchain in Serbia in general? Well, this is an interesting topic. I just mentioned that we had 80 engineers when there were 6,000. Now we have 200. Serbia was an early adopter in terms of Bitcoin itself. Some people might Google and start to look for some data, and you're going to find an interesting information. If you look at the historical data behind Bitcoin, you will notice that currently Serbia has between 15 and 20,000 miners. Back in 2011, we had a bit less than 10,000 people mining, which back then was a big part of the network. It was around 15% of the entire Bitcoin network at the time. So in Serbia, a 7 million people country, we had 15% of all Bitcoin miners in the world. Right now, we have more than double more people, but we are about 0.2% of all the mining power in the world. We are not, important anymore when it comes to mining. But we can still be important when it comes to engineering. The first big ICO actually happened from Serbia. It's called Game Credits. They raised $54 million in April last year. And they have been the biggest ICO ever for about 5 days. In the next 5 days, we had a $100 million ICO and so on. But Serbia actually has a couple of companies which are doing a lot of things regarding engineering of blockchain products. And we are one of the rare countries, I think, which has a certain number of blockchain architects which can actually help people build out these products. And we have interesting countries in the region, such as Slovenia, which has the most blockchain-related startups in the world currently per capita. Obviously, there are not too many Slovenians, so that also influences their potential of growth. And we have 25,000 developers in total in Serbia. So even if everyone just transferred to blockchain projects, we are still not going to be probably the main driver in the world in this field in 5 years from now. We are a small country. But it is a big opportunity for blockchain products to be developed in Serbia, for blockchain products to be started in Serbia, and for our public to have a general awareness of what is happening in the blockchain world in general. So next slide, please. So we created an organization called SBI, which is Serbian Blockchain Initiative, with this in mind. We basically want to help our government and regulators regulate it in a good way. So far, we had pretty much, really positive feedback, but still many of these things in Serbia remain unregulated. The next thing we want to do is invest into our own industry, to raise the number of people actually working in this industry. So if you have any desire to move into the blockchain space at some point, please, reach out to us through SBI or through one of our colleagues, which are going to be around here during the conference. And the third thing we are trying to do is also promote Serbia around the world. This is what we have here. We have a dozen of companies actually raising money and doing really important blockchain-related projects. We have Game Credits, we have Origin Trail. We have quite a lot of companies doing these things in general. And we have about 200 people who are currently able to develop projects. So this is what we want to do. And we think that it's a really good opportunity. We have other organizations we are working with in Slovenia, Croatia, Portugal, Dubai right now. We are trying to discuss with them how can we do many things together. And blockchain is, as you know, decentralized. So right now it's pretty much geographically agnostic. When we started the MVP workshop, it was a small consulting business from Serbia. Right now we had an opportunity to run a $50 million ICO last month for Alex Mashinsky, who is one of the founding fathers of voice over IP. And we all know how big voice over IP is right now. He has 30 patents in it, and he's an Israeli-US billionaire who actually was one of the founders of the protocol itself in 1994. So we had the chance to work with him, and we are still working on Celsius as a product going forward. We have a chance to work with one of the most renowned healthcare ecosystems in the world because they want to adopt blockchain in some way. We also have clients which are dealing with different forms of high-value assets. And what I can say is that from September last year up until now, we had the number of employees grow by around 600% in the last 6 months. So we are also experiencing quite a big growth. In terms of game credits, the game credits which I mentioned, when they did their ICO last year, they had 18 people. Right now, they had 190. We actually have companies in Serbia who can teach other people who are already developers or marketeers or doing something related to legal about these things, and we can actually grow this ecosystem. In SBI, we also don't have just people from Serbia or Serbs which are living abroad. We have around 30% of members which are from other countries. One of the members dealing with our regulation is Loreta Joseph, who is a futures trader who built stock market models for 14 of the world's biggest stock markets. She also introduced blockchain and cryptocurrencies to the Australian stock exchange. Australian stock exchange, because of Loreta, now functions on blockchain. She also did it with regulation in Australia and in Canada, and now is doing it in Serbia with us too. So we think, that the brain trust we can get around the world for these type of projects is really enormous. It's geographically agnostic. Eastern Europe has a lot of potential, and it's already showing. We have countries such as Serbia, Slovenia, Ukraine really emerging as go-to destinations for blockchain engineering. And I think we have a big chance there. Simply from an economical point of view, currently an hour of a blockchain developer is about 4 times more expensive than an hour of a regular web developer. So we are still cheaper than some other countries, but we are obviously still being paid top dollar for these types of projects. So I will encourage you to, explore a blockchain career at least. Next slide, please. So this is, why we did it. If you want to follow us, you can, go to sbi.rs. You can get our social channels there, and we are going to be talking about subjects about blockchain in the region in general. Next slide. So, well, obviously I've been talking, so we can remove this. Okay, next slide, please. But the idea main behind all of this, I think, is that this is an opportunity that we should not pass up. There are currently about 5 or 6 technological trends which come with unexpected IRR, investment of 30% or more. Blockchain is considered one of them, along with machine learning, AI, IoT, etc. And I would encourage you to try out what working with blockchain actually looks like. I see, almost everyone here heard about it. I'm not saying this is the only, thing which is going to exist in the world going forward. Obviously, it's not. In many cases, the use cases for blockchain are currently overblown. But it does offer an incredible number of opportunities, and it is one of the fastest growing markets right now. So any questions, and then I will, let you to the next guy speaking. Mm-hmm. In Serbia, you mean from a regulatory standpoint? It depends. In Serbia, it's considered if you gain cryptocurrency by mining or whatever, you should actually pay value-added tax on it. Most people don't do it, but it's considered that it should be done. There is, because there is still no there is a problem with crypto there, which I will explain, not because you cannot track it or you cannot tax it, but you cannot seize it. If you have an apartment and you are late on your payments or whatever, the bank can seize your apartment for you. With the Bitcoin, you can't do that because there are currently 1 million people validating the transaction. So you would need permission of 400,000 people for you to lose your Bitcoin. So in general, because it goes really easily cross-border, it's really hard to enforce taxation. But from a legal standpoint, it's easy. In terms, Serbia decided you need to pay VAT and corporate and other taxes. European court said you need to be taxed for the profits and corporate sales, but VAT does not apply. So it's still in the early stages. It's the part of that regulatory uncertainty. It basically means whatever you do in this country might be illegal in another country, or they simply don't know. Currently, around 70% of countries do not actually have any blockchain-related legislation whatsoever. So it's gray area. It's a problem, but being a gray area is a problem in general because it does not let you... this is also one of the problems with the public blockchains. I mentioned about Ethereum being expensive in some cases for a low value of a high amount of low value transactions. 3 years ago in Devana, we built something called Lemon Email. It still exists, but people don't use it. The reason people don't use it is that when we built it, we did it for a year, and then we said we have now a decentralized email system. You know, no one can look at your emails. They're immutable. Whatever happens, happens. You know, you have a really great way to send messages, unstoppable way to send messages. And then we realized that when we started building it, Ethereum costed $9. And then when we released it to the public, it was a couple of $100. And then right now it's around 500, but it reached 1,300 at some point. What does that mean? For us, that meant that when we built the system, started building the system, Ethereum, for us to send an email, it cost, without attachments, it costed 0.2 cents to send it. Then, right now, you know, when it was around $500, it costed almost $1 to send an email. And how much money do you think it costs when Ethereum is $500 to put 1 gigabyte of data on the blockchain itself? Does anyone have an idea? Around $13.5 billion for 1 gigabyte of data. And so we said, you know, we can obviously pay $13 billion, but we are not going to do it. Now, obviously, you know, there was no one in the world who would be willing to, you know, send out his pictures from visiting Vienna or whatever for $13 billion. So from an economical point of view, if you are sending over a public blockchain, if you are sending a high volume of data of low value overall, it makes literally no sense. The good thing about Ethereum right now is that in 2 kilobytes of data, you can send $1 million or $1 billion. It doesn't matter, you know, it's just a number. But if we are talking about real-life applications to other stuff, then we need to see, you know, does everything really need to be on the blockchain? If it doesn't, can we make a trusted system by, you know, just storing hashes of all of this? How does this work? So this is one of the struggling, you know, points, because it literally currently many projects have no way of being used from an economical point of view. And when it comes to Ethereum, I just mentioned, you know, no one uses our email system, but it was used to send a couple of thousand emails. And right now it's still one of the 5% most used applications on Ethereum globally. So that explains how outside of ICOs and outside of monetary transactions, how little this is still being used overall. Any other questions? No. Well, I probably went a bit over time anyway, so apologies for that. But if anyone has anything to talk about, we'll be here for a while and for the next 2 days. Milana, thank you for inviting us one more time, and that's it.
I'm sure it was very inspirational, especially because Serbian Blockchain Initiative is a bit new, but they've been doing breakthroughs and they've been working regional, as you can hear. I have some good news to announce. We got the information from one of our colleagues that one young lady from the audience just got a full scholarship for Oxford. And I would like that we all give her a round of applause.